Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to be looking at Jesus' letter that he sent by the hands of John the Apostle to the church at Philadelphia. This letter is preserved for us in Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 13. Now, the town of Philadelphia was located about 25 miles east-southeast of Sardis and about 80 miles due east of Smyrna. It was situated on the Kogamus River, which was a tributary of the Hermus River, of which Sardis was located on. Now, Philadelphia was first built by the Greeks as a center to spread the Greek language and their culture throughout Lydia and Phrygia. It was a rich farming community, but it, like Sardis, was completely destroyed in AD 17 by that great earthquake. Now, like many of the seven churches of Asia, we know little about this congregation except what we have preserved for us right here in this letter. Philadelphia is one of only two congregations, the other one being Smyrna, of which Jesus found absolutely nothing to condemn. Let's look at the description of the speaker beginning in verse 7. Now, Christ's characteristics that are given to the church at Philadelphia are probably the most extensive given to this congregation than any of the other churches. Jesus begins by saying, "These things saith he that is holy." Jesus Christ in his total being is holy. In his character, in his life, he is completely separated from evil. In Isaiah chapter 60, verse 9 and verse 14, the prophet called the Messiah the Holy One of Israel. Remember, the unclean spirit even confessed Jesus Christ was the Holy One of God in Mark chapter 1, verse 24. Peter stepped up on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, verse 27, and called him the Holy One. Also, just a little bit later in chapter 3, verse 14, he called him the same thing. Hebrews 7:26 affirms him to be holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and higher than the heavens. He is the Holy One of God, separated and dedicated for the particular task of redeeming the world. Jesus continues to describe himself as he that is true. Now, earlier in John 14, verse 6, he claimed for himself to be the complete embodiment of truth. He says, "I am the truth." And this is one of the seven great I am statements found in the Gospel of John. There was nothing untrue, nothing hypocritical about Jesus Christ our Lord. When Pilate asked what is truth in John 18, verse 37, he was actually looking at the living truth standing before him in the form of the condemned Christ. Throughout John's gospel, we see Jesus being described as the true friend, John 6:32, the true vine, John 15, verse 1, the true light, John 1, verse 9. Here in the letter to Philadelphia, we also see Jesus describing himself in another way. He says, he is he that hath the key of David, that openeth and no man shutteth, and shutteth and no man openeth. Now, if you have a good cross-reference Bible, you'll know that this is an allusion to Isaiah chapter 22:22. Listen to the way Isaiah put it. "And the key of the house of David will I lay upon his shoulder. So he shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open." Keys normally symbolize authority. You see people walking around with a big old wad of keys on them, you know they've got some authority to go places. And Jesus possesses all authority, both in heaven and in earth. But keys also permit admission, and at the same time forbid the unworthy for entrance. Jesus opens, and no man shuts. He shuts, and no man opens. Possession of the key of David meant that he was the true Messiah. Now, Jesus took possession of this authority when he was resurrected from the grave, ascended on high, and is now seated on the right hand of the throne of God. It was at this time that he was placed above all principality and power and might and dominion and every name that is named, Ephesians chapter 1, verses 20 through 23. Contrary to the false doctrine of premillennialism, Jesus Christ is now seated on David's throne, according to Acts chapter 2, verse 31 and following. I know HD taught a lesson on this on a Wednesday night. showing no doubt that David's throne is in heaven, and that's where Jesus Christ is now seated. He is now King of Kings, 1 Timothy 6, verse 15, ruling and reigning from on high. He has complete authority. He is omnipotent. In making the statement, I know thy works, Jesus also makes known his omniscience. One of the characteristics of the Prince of Peace, the one who would sit on David's throne, was that he would sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking judgment and hasting righteousness, Isaiah chapter 16, verse 5. And also earlier in that same book of Isaiah, it says, the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And thus it is expected that Jesus, as David's rightful heir, would know them. He would know their works. He would know all about them. He knows everything that is going on with everybody. In verses 8 through 10 of our letter, here in Revelation, we have the inspection report. Jesus begins to praise the church here by telling them, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. More than likely, this is an expression concerning the great opportunities of teaching the gospel that is now surfacing that no man is going to be able to keep from them. If you remember, I think Paul made a similar statement to the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 8 and 9. He says, but I will tarry at Ephesus until Pentecost, for a great door and effectual is opened unto me. As we are faithful to the opportunities that God gives us at our hands, he is able to open more opportunities unto us, to those who are willing to take care of them. On the other hand, he could be referring to their continued fellowship with him in this verse. If you notice, the Lord promised the Laodiceans just a little bit later in this same chapter of the book of Revelation. He says, if any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him and he with me. There was no door open available to the church at Laodicea. It was closed. The door that once was opened to them was now closed to the fellowship of the Lord because they departed from him. They are the ones who closed that door, not the Lord himself. And now they would have to open this door in order to have the fellowship with the Son of God being renewed again. Fellowship with the Lord at Philadelphia never had been closed to them, never had been lost. They had maintained their fidelity to the Lord. This was a very faithful congregation, and no man was going to be able to take that communion away from them. These blessings that come from fellowship with the Lord are rich, abundant, and they're free, and therefore no man can shut the door on them. Now, this church at Philadelphia was commended because Jesus says, thou hast a little strength. Now, they were small. They were probably struggling. The thing about this congregation, they never gave up. You think about this, the wondrous things that God can do with small things. Think about Gideon's army. That God himself whittled down all the way to 300 men, and what they were able to do against that vast Midianite army. Think about what God was able to do with Moses' stick. What about Shamgar's ox goad? What about David with his little bitty sling and those small stones? For people to survive, they don't have to be big. They don't have to be big in numbers nor size. They just have to be big in commitment. And that describes the congregation here at Philadelphia. Now, Christ had confidence in this congregation, and he never breaks the bruised reed nor quenches the smoking flax, Matthew chapter 12, verse 20. They were utilizing the strength that they possessed, and they did wonders with it. Now, Philadelphia was also highly commended because Jesus says they had kept my word. They not only obeyed that word, but they also protected it and they guarded it. They were obedient to that word. They were steadfast in that word. This was, I believe, their positive plus by way of commendation. After all, didn't Jesus say in John 12:48, "He that rejecteth me and receiveth not my words hath one that judgeth him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day." That word is important because we are going to be judged in the final day by that very word. Remember in the book of Revelation, it talks about the books being opened at the judgment. One of those books is going to be our New Testament Bible. The very words of Jesus Christ are going to judge us on that day. We better know what that word says. But you want to know the secret of keeping that word? Well, it's not a secret because Jesus already told us how to keep that word. In John 14:23, he says, "If a man love me, he will keep my words." Only a true and steadfast love for the Lord will keep us faithful. But if we don't love him, that word means nothing to us. Now, this congregation of the Lord's body had also not denied the Lord's name. The brethren at Philadelphia, I've probably said Philippi several times. That Phil, that always gets me to Philippi. But to Philadelphia, they had obeyed the Lord, and they had not in any way questioned the Lord's authority. No doubt there had been times that this meant ridicule, it meant persecution for them, but they patiently endured through all of it. They were faithful to his name, and they upheld that name. Now, because they had kept his word of patience, Jesus Christ would also keep them from the hour of temptation. The Christians at Philippi, they certainly suffered at the hands of the Jews. But again, they stood against it. But now Jesus reciprocates with the precious promise that he would protect them in the hour of temptation. So they're about to enter into the great temptation that the whole world is about to face. This is not referring to the final judgment because it mentions the hour of temptation. This is a period of time. It's a certain length of time. It's not at the end of time. If you remember the good church at Smyrna, they also were not completely delivered from this period, this period of temptation. In fact, they were going to suffer tribulation for 10 days. So a period of testing was going to come, but Jesus Christ was going to keep those who kept his word. And that's the secret to overcoming temptation and trials and tribulations. But notice again, Jesus didn't ever say he was going to spare them the temptations. He was just going to keep them. Now, because of their endurance, Jesus also promised that the synagogue of Satan, those who claimed to be Jews but really weren't, they're going to come and worship before their feet, and they're going to know that this congregation, these people, would love the Lord. These false Jews, these Satan worshipers, they were going to give proper recognition to them and know that Jesus truly did love that congregation. This may, of course, be in reference to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70, finally convincing these ungodly Jews that Jesus Christ truly is a man of his word. Verse 11 of our letter, we had the admonition. Even in the midst of commendation and promises, the Lord admonishes them. He says, "Behold, I come quickly. Hold fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown." Jesus is going to come quickly upon them, and he's going to protect them, just like he promised in verse 10. That term "quickly" is taken from the Greek word taxu, and it is not an adverb of time. Rather, it refers to the manner of Jesus' coming, that he is going to come speedily and without hesitation. But some people have taken this word and turned it into an adverb of time, and some have translated it as soon. This is a misuse of words, and it also leads to false teaching. In fact, I don't know, many of you may remember the song in many songbooks throughout the Brotherhood, "Jesus is coming soon." This is a very bad misuse of that word because we do not know the hour or the time when Jesus Christ is going to come. We just know that he is, and we have to be ready at all times. Jesus then admonishes them to continue their faithful walk, hold fast to their present acceptable condition, that no man take thy crown. The Christians at Philadelphia, they were already reigning as kings, as are all Christians, according to Revelation chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. And they were presently victors of the crown that had been laid up for them. But Jesus made it very plain that that crown can be taken away. How foolish it is that people who have spent all of their lives to fight the good fight of faith, they've won the crown of victory, and then just to throw it all away because they've been deceived by some man. And it's sad, but it happens all the time. And thus we have the warning right here. In verse 12, Jesus gives them a promised reward. Of course, avoiding hell and obtaining heaven is really the bottom line of each of the exhortations that is given to each of the churches of Asia. It's all expressed a little bit differently, but yet dynamically. To the overcomers at Philadelphia, Jesus said, "He will make them a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out." The spiritual temple of God on the earth is nothing but the church itself. A pillar is a column that supports the weight of a building, and using it metaphorically, it describes those who bear up under the responsibility within the churches. Each Christian that endures the trials before them, they solidify themselves into a position of permanent influence in the church. The more trials we're able to overcome, the stronger we become, that we are described as a pillar. And the term pillar is suggestive of permanence. Remember where Philadelphia is located. It's located right in the middle of earthquake country. But when Satan comes and he shakes the foundation of the earth with false teaching and liberalism, they will be able to remain firm and steadfast. To the overcomers, Jesus said, "I will write upon him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God." Throughout the apocalypse, the name of the Father being upon the saints is an indication that they actually belong to God. So the overcomer has the assurance that he is God's. The overcomer is also inhabited the New Jerusalem, which is the church, which is a product of heaven. And he enters into this new city by keeping God's commandments, Revelation 22, verse 14. He is a citizen of the city. He will continue to be a citizen until he ceases to be an overcomer. The city of which we belong to, it's the Church of Christ. And thus we wear the name Christian and the name Christian only. And when we fail to wear this name, or we choose to change that name, we cease to be overcomers. We've given in to Satan. As the list of blessings for overcomers continues to grow, we ought to be encouraged to strive to gain the victory for ourselves. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The saints at Philadelphia had been faithful. They had obeyed the dictates of the Spirit. And their holiness is a result of them being led by the Spirit. So it has to be concluded that we need to hear what the Spirit says to the churches. We need to listen to what God has told us through the Holy Writ. The church at Philadelphia was in great shape. They were small. They may have lacked great ability, but they were acceptable to God. And isn't that the goal we're looking for? It's very easy to become discouraged when so few people stand together. We see this in small congregations all the time. They get so desperate for membership that they give in to Satan and they start teaching false doctrine, anything just to bring people into the doors. But you know, being small is not a reason to throw up our hands and do nothing. These brethren had not given up. They held on, they moved forward. Now, the only way that we can overcome today, of course, is being in the Lord. As Paul said in Philippians 4, verse 13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And the only way to get in the Lord is through baptism. Romans chapter 6, verse 3, Galatians 3, verse 27. That's obedience of the gospel. If you haven't obeyed the gospel, you're not in the Lord. You cannot be an overcomer. So we encourage you, if you know what to do, the right thing to do, you have the opportunity tonight to do that, to make things right with God. But also, to be an overcomer, you have to remain in the Lord. That means you have to stay faithful to that word. Because you can lose your crown when you lose your commitment. And maybe you've lost your commitment. Maybe you need to rededicate your life tonight. If there's anything that we can help you to get right with God, why don't you let your needs be known while together we stand and sing.